Don't resist. Tonight you are mine." Apache Giant Widow said to Virgin Rancher. The Arizona sun had begun its slow descent behind the distant mesas, casting long shadows across the dry, golden land. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and dust stirred up by the afternoon wind. On this quiet evening, the ranch seemed almost alive in its stillness. The gentle lowing of cattle drifted across the fields, mingling with the occasional call of a hawk circling far above. The rancher, a young man named Samuel, wiped the sweat from his brow as he surveyed the land his family had cared for over generations. He had inherited the ranch not long ago after his father passed, leaving Samuel with the heavy responsibility of maintaining the homestead and keeping the cattle healthy. The work was hard, demanding, and often lonely, but Samuel had grown up on this land, and it was a place he loved with all his heart. Samuel was known in the small town nearby as a good-hearted young man. People admired his honesty and his quiet nature. He had a gentle demeanor that drew trust and respect, but he was also inexperienced in many things beyond ranch work. Samuel had grown up under the watchful eyes of his family and the close-knit community, sheltered from much of the harshness of the outside world. He was not unkindly naive, but his innocence about people, especially women, was noticeable. He had never been in love, never courted anyone, and he often felt unsure about the complexities of adult relationships. Life for him had always been simple: care for the land, tend the cattle, and follow the rhythms of nature. Not far from Samuel's ranch, on the edge of a rocky wooded area, lived a woman who was the subject of much curiosity and many rumors. She was an Apache widow named Ayanna. The townspeople rarely saw her, and those who did spoke of her in hushed tones. She was a tall, imposing woman, with a presence that demanded attention without a word. Her hair was long and black, usually tied in a single braid, and her eyes carried the intensity of someone who had seen hardship and survived. People said she had lived a life full of loss, and that her husband had died many years ago, leaving her alone on the rugged land that had been her family's. Ayanna was known for her independence, her strength, and her unwillingness to bow to anyone's expectations. She had a reputation for being both wise and formidable, and many in the town treated her with a mixture of respect and fear. Despite the distance between their worlds, fate was about to bring Samuel and Ayanna together in a way that neither could have expected. That evening, as the sun dipped lower, Samuel was finishing his routine checks on the cattle near a small watering hole at the edge of his property. He moved quietly, careful not to startle the animals, feeling the satisfaction that came from a day's honest work. The desert was peaceful, almost serene, and Samuel found comfort in the solitude. Yet, amid this quiet, there was a sense of anticipation he could not place. Suddenly, movement caught his eye. At first, he thought it was one of the deer that sometimes wandered close to the ranch, but then he realized it was a figure, tall, strong, and confident, emerging from the rocky slope. Samuel's heart skipped a beat. He had heard stories of Ayanna, of her height and strength, of the way she could appear and command attention without a word. Now, seeing her in person, he understood why the rumors were so persistent. She seemed to flow with the land, her movements deliberate, as if she belonged entirely to the desert. Ayanna's gaze met Samuel's, sharp and unwavering. For a moment, time seemed to pause. He felt a mix of awe and nervousness. She did not speak immediately. She simply watched, and in that silence, Samuel sensed the weight of her presence. It was as though the world around them had faded, leaving only the two of them at the edge of the land, where wild nature met the tameness of the ranch. Samuel felt a strange curiosity, a pull toward this woman who was both a mystery and a challenge. When Ayanna finally spoke, her voice was calm, firm, and carrying a quiet authority. Samuel listened, unable to look away, aware that this was a woman who had faced life's trials and had emerged stronger for them. He felt both intimidated and drawn in, understanding that this encounter would mark a turning point in his life. She spoke of her land, of the hardship she had endured, and of the independence she had fought to maintain. Samuel, though young and inexperienced, could see the depth of her character. Her strength was not just physical, it was emotional and mental, shaped by years of solitude and perseverance. As the sky turned shades of pink and orange, Samuel realized that meeting Ayanna was unlike anything he had experienced before. The desert seemed to hum with life around them, the distant cries of birds punctuating the silence between words. Samuel felt a mixture of fear, respect, and fascination. He knew that this encounter would not be a simple one. It carried the weight of challenge and learning. For the first time, he felt that the world was much larger and more complex than he had imagined, filled with people whose experiences and stories were far beyond his understanding. Samuel's thoughts wandered as he considered what it meant to meet someone like Ayanna. He thought about the stories he had heard as a boy, the warnings of townspeople, and the mysteries that had surrounded her life. Yet now, standing face to face with her, he understood that there was more to respect than fear. There was also admiration, curiosity, and the recognition that every person's journey shapes who they are. In Ayanna, Samuel saw a reflection of resilience, courage, and a life lived with intention. By the time the sun had almost disappeared behind the horizon, Samuel felt a quiet shift within himself. He had spent much of his life focused on the routines of the ranch, the predictable rhythms of work and care. But now, with Ayanna's presence, he realized that life held unexpected moments, moments that challenged assumptions, that tested courage, and that offered new perspectives. This encounter, brief as it seemed, would leave a lasting impression on him. It was the beginning of a story that neither the young rancher nor the Apache widow could have fully anticipated, a story that would unfold with lessons of trust, respect, and understanding of another human being's strength. As night approached, the desert air cooled, and shadows stretched across the land. Samuel watched Ayanna move back toward the rocky terrain she called home, her figure blending with the landscape. He felt a mixture of relief and anticipation, unsure of what the future held, but certain that this meeting had changed him. The quiet of the ranch returned, but Samuel's thoughts were alive with questions, reflections, and a newfound awareness of the world beyond his familiar boundaries. In that moment, he realized that life could surprise him in ways that were both challenging and enlightening, and that the lessons he would learn from encounters like this were as important as the work he did every day on the ranch. The first chapter of Samuel's life beyond innocence had begun, not with grand events, but with the simple, profound experience of meeting someone whose life had been shaped by strength, resilience, and independence. And as he returned to his chores under the first stars of night, he carried with him a sense of anticipation, a respect for the unknown, and the awareness that his own journey was only beginning. The evening air was cool now, and the sun had disappeared entirely, leaving only a deep blue sky scattered with early stars. The desert seemed quieter, but the wind carried a soft whisper through the sparse trees and shrubs. Samuel stood near the watering hole, staring after the tall, silent figure of Ayanna as she disappeared among the rocks. His heart still raced from the encounter. He had never met anyone like her, someone so confident, so strong, and yet so mysterious. He had always thought of life in simple, predictable terms. Wake up, tend the cattle, repair fences, and go to bed. But tonight, everything seemed different. He felt a strange mix of curiosity and anxiety that he could not explain. Samuel returned to the ranch house slowly, feeling the familiar wooden boards beneath his boots and the cool night air brushing against his skin. His mind replayed every detail of the meeting. He remembered how Ayanna had looked at him, her eyes steady and unflinching, and the calm authority in her voice. Something about the way she carried herself made him feel both small and challenged. He realized that he had been confronted not just with a person, but with an entirely different way of seeing the world, one shaped by independence, strength, and the lessons of a life lived far from ordinary. That night Samuel lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the widow. He wondered what it must have been like to live alone in the desert, to rely entirely on oneself for survival. He imagined the hardships she had faced, the storms, the cold nights, and the endless work of maintaining her land. Yet, despite all that, she carried herself with pride and dignity. He thought about how different their lives were, yet how this meeting somehow connected them. Samuel realized that he had been sheltered in many ways, protected by his family and the routines of the ranch, while Ayanna had faced life without such protections. The next morning, Samuel woke early, as was his habit, to check on the cattle before the heat of the day became too strong. He moved with the ease of experience, feeding the animals, fixing broken fences, and walking the fields. But even in the midst of his work, his thoughts kept returning to Ayanna. He remembered her words, her presence, and the way she had looked at him, not with anger or hostility, but with a firm, undeniable certainty. He wondered why she had come to the watering hole that evening, why she had chosen him of all people. He could not shake the feeling that the encounter was the beginning of something larger, something that would teach him lessons he could not yet understand. Days passed, and Samuel continued with his work, but the memory of Ayanna lingered in his mind like a shadow he could not escape. The townspeople occasionally mentioned her, speaking in quiet tones of respect, and Samuel realized that many people both feared and admired her. Some called her stubborn, some called her wise, and others whispered about her strength. Samuel began to understand that she carried a presence that demanded attention, not through force, but through the way she lived her life. He felt a strange mixture of fear and admiration, knowing that meeting her again would not be easy, but also feeling drawn to the challenge. One evening, a few days after their first meeting, Samuel decided to visit the edge of his property near the rocks where he had first seen Ayanna. He carried a small basket of food, partly as a gesture of kindness, partly out of curiosity, and partly because he felt an inexplicable desire to connect. The desert was calm, with the orange glow of the setting sun painting the landscape in warm colors. He moved slowly, careful not to disturb the quiet beauty around him. The cattle were resting, and the occasional chirp of a bird reminded him that life in the desert continued quietly, indifferent to human concerns. As he approached the rocky slope, he saw Ayanna again. She was sitting on a flat rock, her posture relaxed but her eyes alert. She looked up as Samuel approached, and for a moment there was silence. Samuel held the basket out, offering it with a mix of respect and caution. Ayanna's gaze softened slightly, and she nodded, signaling that he could come closer. He placed the basket on the ground and sat nearby, careful not to invade her space. They began to talk, first in small words, sharing basic observations about the land, the weather, and the cattle. Samuel felt the conversation slowly unfold, like a flower opening to the sun. Ayanna's voice was calm, measured, and filled with knowledge about the desert that Samuel could not have imagined. She spoke of plants that healed, water sources hidden from view, and the ways the land could provide for those who knew how to listen. Samuel was fascinated, absorbing every word, realizing that he had much to learn about the world beyond the ranch. As the conversation deepened, Ayana shared small pieces of her past, not in a way that demanded pity, but in a way that allowed understanding. She spoke of her husband, of the years she had lived alone, and of the lessons she had learned through survival and resilience. Samuel listened carefully, feeling a mixture of empathy and awe. He realized that this woman, strong and commanding, had faced hardships that he could barely imagine. Yet she had not allowed those hardships to break her spirit. She had learned to stand tall, to rely on herself, and to respect the land that had given her life. Hours passed and the sky darkened, stars beginning to fill the night. Samuel felt an unexpected connection forming, not of romance or desire, but of respect, curiosity, and shared understanding. He realized that he was learning something important, something that could not be taught in school or learned from books. He was learning about strength, independence, and the quiet power of a person who had lived fully and courageously. Ayana, in turn, seemed to acknowledge his openness, his willingness to listen, and his respect for her world. As the night grew deeper, Samuel knew it was time to return to the ranch. He stood, brushing off dust from his clothes, and Ayana rose as well. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the silence filled with unspoken understanding. Samuel felt a sense of gratitude for the encounter, knowing that it had changed him in ways he could not yet describe. He turned toward his home, feeling the cool night air on his face, carrying with him the knowledge that life held challenges, mysteries, and lessons beyond what he had ever imagined. By the time he reached the ranch house, Samuel's mind was alive with thoughts, questions, and reflections. He realized that his life was no longer as simple as it had seemed. The encounter with Ayana had opened a door to a world of complexity, strength, and understanding. He felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness, knowing that their paths would cross again, and that each meeting would teach him more about courage, respect, and the depth of human experience. That night, Samuel lay in bed again, staring at the ceiling, but this time his mind was not filled with worry or uncertainty. It was filled with curiosity, respect, and a growing understanding of the world and the people in it. He realized that encounters like this, moments that challenged his assumptions and tested his courage, were gifts in their own way. And as sleep finally claimed him, he dreamed not of cattle or chores, but of the vast desert, the strength of those who lived in it, and the unexpected lessons that life had begun to teach him. Days turned into weeks, and Samuel found himself thinking about Ayana more often than he realized. The encounters by the rocky slope had become a part of his life, small but significant moments that left a lasting impression. He continued his work on the ranch as usual, checking fences, tending to the cattle, and maintaining the land that had been his family's for generations. Yet, beneath the routine, there was a sense of anticipation he could not shake, a quiet awareness that his life was slowly changing. Something about Ayana, her strength, her calm confidence, and the stories she shared, had opened a door in his mind that could not be closed. One afternoon, while Samuel was repairing a fence near the edge of his property, he noticed movement among the distant rocks. Ayana had appeared again, walking with her steady, assured stride. Samuel set down his tools and watched her approach, feeling that familiar mixture of awe and nervousness. He was beginning to understand that her presence brought not fear alone, but also lessons about courage, independence, and self-respect. He reminded himself that she had faced life's difficulties alone, that her experiences had shaped her into a person of remarkable resilience, and that he had much to learn from observing her. When she reached him, Samuel greeted her cautiously, unsure of how to bridge the distance between their worlds. Ayana nodded, her expression calm but unreadable. She did not speak immediately, instead scanning the horizon, as if the land itself had its own story to tell. Samuel waited patiently, realizing that she was not someone who rushed words or actions. She had a way of commanding presence without demanding attention, a quiet strength that spoke volumes. Samuel felt both intimidated and inspired. In her silence, he sensed that a lesson was about to unfold, one that would test his understanding of courage and trust. Ayanna finally spoke, her voice steady and certain. She asked Samuel about his life on the ranch, about the work he did, and how he had learned to manage the responsibilities left to him. Samuel answered honestly, describing the routines, the challenges, and the small victories that came with caring for the land. Ayanna listened carefully, nodding at points, her gaze never leaving his face. She did not interrupt, but her attention made Samuel aware of the importance of every word he spoke. He realized that in her presence, honesty was not just appreciated, it was expected. As the conversation deepened, Ayanna began to share more about her own experiences. She spoke of the years she had lived alone, the hardship she had faced, and the lessons she had learned about survival and self-reliance. Samuel listened intently, struck by her resilience and the quiet dignity with which she carried her past. She spoke not with bitterness or complaint, but with a calm clarity that made every word feel purposeful. Samuel began to understand that strength was not always loud or aggressive. Sometimes it was measured, deliberate, and deeply rooted in experience. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon when Ayanna asked Samuel to follow her to a nearby canyon. He hesitated for a moment, but curiosity and a desire to learn overcame any caution. He followed her along the winding path, noting the way she moved with certainty, as though she knew every stone, every curve of the land. The canyon walls rose high on either side, casting long shadows across the dry floor. Samuel felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. He had never ventured this far into the rocks alone with another person, and he realized that he was stepping into a world unfamiliar and full of new experiences. In the canyon, Ayanna stopped and gestured for Samuel to sit on a large flat rock. The air was cooler here, and the shadows stretched long and deep. She spoke of the land, of the way the rocks could hide water, provide shelter from the wind, and even guide travelers if one paid close attention. Samuel was fascinated, absorbing every detail. He realized that this woman had knowledge that went beyond simple survival. She understood the language of the desert, its rhythms, its warnings, and its gifts. He began to see the desert not just as land to work and manage, but as a living, breathing place with secrets waiting to be discovered.
As we sat together, the conversation shifted.
Ayanna asked Samuel about his fears, about moments when he had felt uncertain or overwhelmed. At first, Samuel struggled to answer, unaccustomed to speaking of such personal feelings, but her calm patience encouraged him. He admitted the moments of doubt he had faced running the ranch, his insecurities about living up to his father's legacy, and his uncertainty about the future. Ayanna listened, her expression thoughtful, and then shared her own experiences of doubt and struggle. She told him about nights spent alone, moments of fear, and the times she had questioned her own ability to continue. Samuel realized that even someone as strong and independent as Ayanna had faced fear, yet she had learned to face it without letting it define her. The sun had almost set when Ayanna began to speak of challenges beyond the physical, challenges of the heart, of trust, and of understanding people who come into your life unexpectedly. Samuel listened closely, sensing that the conversation was moving toward a lesson that went beyond the land and the work he knew. She spoke of the importance of listening, of respecting boundaries, and of recognizing the strength in others without attempting to control or dominate. Samuel felt the weight of her words, realizing that he was learning something profound about relationships, respect, and the balance between courage and humility. Night approached quickly, and the canyon grew darker. Samuel felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The day had been unlike any other. He had followed Ayanna into a place unfamiliar, learned lessons he could not have imagined, and confronted thoughts and feelings he had long avoided. He realized that this turning point, this moment of learning, reflection, and understanding, was shaping him in ways that would affect his life forever. The lessons were not easy, but they were important. He understood that courage was not just about facing danger, but also about opening oneself to experience, to learning, and to growth. As they returned to the edge of the ranch property, Ayanna spoke one last time, reminding Samuel to respect both the land and those who inhabit it, to carry lessons with him, and to remain aware of the responsibilities that came with maturity and independence. Samuel nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. They parted with a quiet acknowledgement, a recognition that this turning point had changed the way he saw the world and himself. That night, Samuel lay in bed, reflecting on the events of the day. He thought about the canyon, the lessons of the land, and the wisdom in Ayanna's words. He realized that life was full of unexpected challenges and opportunities, and that the people we meet along the way can teach us lessons we could never learn alone. He felt a sense of growth, a new understanding of courage, respect, and resilience. For the first time, he recognized that his life was expanding beyond the simple routines of the ranch, opening to experiences that demanded not just effort, but reflection and understanding. Samuel knew that the journey ahead would not always be easy. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, and more opportunities to grow. But he felt ready to face what came next, strengthened by the turning point he had experienced in the canyon, guided by the wisdom of someone who had walked a path of strength and resilience before him. And as he drifted to sleep under the stars, he felt a quiet confidence that the lessons of this day would stay with him forever, shaping the man he was becoming. The nights grew longer and cooler as the desert slowly shifted toward autumn. Samuel found himself thinking about Ayanna almost constantly. Her presence, her words, and her quiet strength had left a mark on him that he could not ignore. He continued with his daily work on the ranch, mending fences, feeding the cattle, and keeping the land in order, but now every task carried a new awareness. The wind that swept across the field seemed to whisper lessons he had not noticed before, and even the smallest details of the desert, the way a hawk soared, the patterns of sand, the colors of the rocks, seemed alive with meaning. He understood that life was more layered than he had imagined, and that the lessons he learned from Ayanna were about more than just the land. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky filled with shades of orange and purple, Samuel saw Ayanna again near the edge of the rocky slope. This time, she was not alone in her thoughts, as her eyes met his with a look that was both calm and intense. Samuel felt the familiar stirring of curiosity and nervousness, yet there was something different this time. He sensed that the meeting would challenge him in a way he had not yet experienced. He approached cautiously, carrying a small gift, a loaf of bread he had baked that morning, hoping to offer a gesture of friendship. Ayanna nodded at the gift, but did not speak immediately. She studied Samuel with a quiet intensity that made him feel both exposed and understood. Samuel realized that she could see much more than he had ever shown anyone. She was not just noticing his actions, but his thoughts, his hesitation, and the unspoken fears that he tried to hide even from himself. It was as though she had a window into his mind, and the realization made him feel both vulnerable and challenged. He had never been confronted by another person in such a deep and thoughtful way. Finally, Ayanna spoke, her voice calm but firm. She asked Samuel about his feelings, about his fears, his doubts, and the struggles he faced alone on the ranch. At first, Samuel hesitated. He had always been private with his emotions, not used to sharing them openly. But her presence was disarming. There was no judgment in her eyes, only expectation and understanding. He began to speak carefully, sharing his worries about managing the ranch alone, about living up to his father's legacy, and about the uncertainty of the future. As he spoke, he felt a mixture of relief and unease. It was uncomfortable to be so honest, yet liberating at the same time. Ayanna listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful. When he finished, she shared her own experiences of emotional struggle, not in a way that demanded sympathy, but in a way that conveyed strength and resilience. She spoke of loss, loneliness, and moments when she had questioned her own choices, yet she had always found a way to persevere. Samuel listened carefully, realizing that strength was not simply about surviving physical challenges, but also about navigating the emotional complexities of life. Ayanna's words were heavy with wisdom, and Samuel felt himself growing under their weight. As night fell, the two of them moved closer to the canyon, where the wind whispered through the rocks and the shadows deepened. Samuel realized that the canyon was more than just a physical place. It was a space of reflection, where the lessons of life could be explored without distraction. Here the emotional tension between them grew, not in a frightening way, but as a natural consequence of facing truths about themselves and their lives. Samuel felt both fear and curiosity. He was stepping into a world of emotions that he had never fully understood, and the intensity of it left him feeling alive in a way he had not experienced before. Ayanna spoke again, this time about boundaries, respect, and the responsibilities that come with forming connections. She emphasized the importance of listening, understanding, and being present for someone without trying to dominate or control them. Samuel felt the weight of her words deeply. He realized that the lessons she was teaching him were not simple instructions, but principles for living with integrity and empathy. He thought about his own life, about how he had interacted with people in the past, and about how he wanted to grow as a man capable of understanding and respecting others. As the night progressed, the conversation turned to courage, the kind of courage that comes not from action alone, but from vulnerability and self-awareness. Samuel admitted his fears about failing, about making mistakes, and about not living up to expectations. Ayanna shared her own moments of uncertainty and how she had learned to trust herself and her instincts. Samuel felt a deep connection forming, not born of attraction or desire, but of mutual respect and understanding. He realized that the emotional peak of this moment was not in grand gestures, but in the shared recognition of each other's humanity and strength. At one point, the canyon fell completely silent. The stars above were brilliant and clear, and the desert seemed to hold its breath. Samuel felt a moment of clarity, understanding that his life was changing in ways he could not fully control. He recognized that true strength came not from isolation or dominance, but from courage, honesty, and the willingness to face one's own limitations. He also realized that Ayanna, despite her commanding presence, had faced similar challenges and had emerged resilient. The emotional tension reached its peak as Samuel felt both fear and admiration, uncertainty and determination, all in the same instant. As the night deepened, Ayanna spoke one final time about lessons that could not be taught in books or learned from others, lessons that had to be experienced. She encouraged Samuel to continue learning, observing, and growing, emphasizing that life was a journey filled with moments that tested courage, patience, and understanding. Samuel listened intently, feeling a profound respect for her wisdom. He knew that this experience, this emotional peak, would stay with him forever, shaping the way he saw himself and the world around him. By the time they returned to the edge of the ranch property, the night was deep and quiet. Samuel felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. He had faced emotions he had never confronted before: fear, respect, empathy, and awe. The lessons of the evening were not easy to absorb, but he understood their importance. He realized that true growth often comes from moments that challenge both the heart and the mind, and that these moments could define a person in ways nothing else could. That night, Samuel lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling and reflecting on the events of the day. He thought about the canyon, the lessons of courage, and the emotional peak he had experienced. He realized that life was full of challenges and opportunities, and that understanding the strength and humanity of others was a crucial part of personal growth. He felt a quiet determination to carry these lessons forward, to continue learning, and to honor the trust and wisdom Ayanna had shared with him. In the following days, Samuel noticed changes in himself. He approached his work with a renewed focus, a deeper awareness of the land, and a greater appreciation for the people he encountered. He began to understand that the emotional lessons he had learned were as important as the physical labor he performed daily. He also recognized that his connection with Ayanna had opened his mind to the idea that learning, respect, and courage were ongoing processes, not destinations. Each encounter, each conversation, each moment of reflection was a step in a journey of growth that would continue for the rest of his life. Samuel understood that the emotional peak of this period was not a dramatic event in the traditional sense, but a quiet, intense realization of life's complexities. He knew that he had been changed by his interactions with Ayanna, that he had faced fears he had long ignored, and that he had begun to understand the strength required to navigate both the physical and emotional landscapes of life. And as he looked out over the ranch under the first light of dawn, he felt a sense of hope and readiness, knowing that whatever challenges came next, he would face them with courage, respect, and a deeper understanding of himself and the world. The days that followed the canyon encounter were quiet, yet Samuel could feel the subtle changes in himself. He continued his daily routines on the ranch, tending the cattle, repairing fences, and keeping the land in order. But each task now carried a new sense of awareness. The wind that blew across the fields seemed to speak to him differently, whispering lessons he had learned from the desert and from Ayanna. The sunrise no longer felt ordinary. It was a reminder of the cycles of life, the persistence required to care for the land, and the growth that came from patience and attention. Samuel understood that life had a rhythm he was only beginning to comprehend, and he carried the lessons of his encounters with Ayanna into every action he took. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned brilliant shades of pink and gold, Samuel saw Ayanna again near the rocks where they had first met. This time he approached with calm confidence, no longer feeling the nervousness that had once accompanied her presence. He felt a deep respect for the woman who had taught him so much, not just about the land, but about life, courage, and understanding. Ayanna's gaze met his, and for a moment they simply observed each other. There were no words yet, only acknowledgement of the connection they had formed over weeks of shared experience and reflection. Samuel finally spoke, expressing his gratitude for the lessons she had shared and for the patience she had shown as he learned to navigate the complexities of life. Ayanna listened quietly, her expression thoughtful, and then spoke in return. She reminded him that life would continue to present challenges, but that he now had the tools to face them with courage and clarity. She emphasized that the most important lessons were often those learned through experience, through observation, and through reflection. Samuel understood fully what she meant. He had been shaped not only by the physical work of the ranch, but also by the emotional and mental lessons he had absorbed from her guidance. As the evening deepened into night, Ayanna and Samuel shared stories of the past, speaking of moments that had shaped them into the people they were. Samuel told her more about his family, his father's work, and the values that had guided him from childhood. Ayanna shared stories of her own upbringing, the strength of her ancestors, and the lessons she had learned from facing life alone. Samuel realized that these exchanges were not just about storytelling. They were a way of understanding one another, of building trust and respect, and of recognizing the complexity of human experience. The stars began to appear, bright and clear in the desert sky, and Samuel felt a sense of peace settle over him. He understood that the encounters he had shared with Ayanna were part of a larger journey, a journey of growth, self-awareness, and understanding. He recognized that courage was not always about action in the moment. Sometimes it was about reflection, learning, and allowing oneself to be open to new experiences. Ayanna's wisdom had shown him that true strength came from knowledge, patience, and the ability to respect both oneself and others. Over the following weeks, Samuel noticed further changes in his approach to life. He worked more efficiently on the ranch, but he also took time to observe the land, to notice the subtle signs of wildlife, the patterns of the wind, and the behavior of his cattle. He began to understand the importance of patience, of allowing time for things to develop naturally, and of listening carefully before making decisions. These lessons were not easy to absorb, but he found that each day brought new understanding and a growing sense of confidence. He realized that life was a series of challenges, and each challenge offered an opportunity to grow stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Samuel also recognized changes in the way he viewed other people. He had always been respectful, but now he felt a deeper awareness of the experiences and struggles that shaped those around him. He understood that every person had their own lessons to learn and their own challenges to overcome, and he approached interactions with greater empathy and patience. Ayanna's guidance had shown him that respect and understanding were not passive qualities. They required attention, effort, and a willingness to see beyond one's own perspective. One afternoon, Samuel found himself reflecting on the first evening he had met Ayanna. He remembered the quiet intensity of her gaze, the calm authority in her voice, and the lessons he had begun to learn in that moment. He realized that everything that had followed, the canyon visit, the long conversations, and the emotional challenges, had prepared him for a deeper understanding of life. He felt gratitude, not only for the guidance he had received, but also for the growth he had achieved through facing his own fears and uncertainties. The journey had taught him resilience, courage, and the importance of humility in the face of knowledge and experience. By the end of autumn, Samuel had grown significantly as a person. He was more confident in his abilities on the ranch, more thoughtful in his interactions with others, and more aware of the complexity of life around him. The lessons from Ayanna had become part of his daily routine, subtly influencing his decisions, his actions, and his reflections. He understood that learning was a continuous process, and that the experiences he had shared with her were a foundation for growth that would last a lifetime. One clear night, under the blanket of stars, Samuel visited the edge of his property once more. He found Ayanna sitting quietly on a flat rock, observing the desert as she often did. Samuel approached, carrying a sense of calm and respect. They spoke of the passing seasons, the changes in the land, and the continuity of life. Samuel felt a sense of completion, as though the journey of learning and growth had reached a meaningful point. He realized that while life would continue to present challenges, he now had the perspective and strength to meet them with confidence and integrity. As the night deepened, Samuel and Ayanna shared a moment of quiet reflection. No words were needed to convey the understanding between them. Samuel knew that this connection had shaped him profoundly, not through dramatic events, but through consistent presence, guidance, and shared experience. He understood that the true power of their encounters lay in the lessons learned, the courage to face uncertainty, the respect for life and others, and the awareness that growth often comes through quiet reflection and careful observation. When Samuel returned to the ranch that night, he felt a profound sense of peace. He understood that the experiences with Ayanna had prepared him for the life ahead, equipping him with wisdom, resilience, and a deeper understanding of human connection. He realized that true strength was measured not by physical power or authority, but by the courage to face life honestly, to respect others, and to continue learning through experience. The lessons he had absorbed were not fleeting. They had become part of the foundation of his character. In the weeks that followed, Samuel continued his life on the ranch with renewed purpose. He worked with dedication, observed the land carefully, and approached challenges with patience and thoughtfulness. The lessons from Ayanna remained with him, guiding his decisions and shaping his understanding of himself and the world. He knew that life would continue to present obstacles, but he felt ready to meet them with courage, empathy, and confidence. Finally, Samuel understood that the encounters with Ayanna had not just been moments of learning, they had been milestones in his growth. He had faced uncertainty, reflected deeply, and absorbed wisdom that would carry him through the years. The emotional and mental challenges had strengthened him, and the quiet guidance of a remarkable woman had opened his eyes to the possibilities of life beyond routine and predictability. Samuel realized that every experience, every interaction, and every lesson had contributed to the man he was becoming. As the first winter winds began to sweep across the desert, Samuel stood on a ridge overlooking his land. The cattle grazed peacefully, the wind whispered through the trees, and the night sky glittered with stars. He thought of Ayanna and the lessons she had shared, understanding that their time together had been transformative. He felt gratitude, strength, and a quiet confidence. Life on the ranch would continue. Challenges would arise and opportunities to grow would persist, but Samuel now knew that he could meet them with courage, respect, and awareness. And so, the story reached its gentle resolution, not with dramatic events or sudden revelations, but with the quiet, steady transformation of a young man who had learned the true value of courage, understanding, and respect. Samuel's life would continue on the ranch, shaped forever by the lessons of the desert, the wisdom of Ayanna, and the realization that growth often comes from the moments that challenge us to think, feel, and act with integrity.